You ever wonder what would happen if the system you built with your own two hands decided one day you didn't belong? I'm not talking about a movie plot. This is what actually happened to a man who spent years quietly building a tech empire, only to find himself dismissed, profiled, and humiliated while sitting in an economy seat on his own airline. The crew didn't just see him as another passenger, they saw him as a problem, a threat, someone to be put in his place. What they didn't know, what no one on that plane realized, was that they were about to pick the wrong fight with the guy who signed the checks, a man named Julian Washington, the most powerful ghost in the business. Now, Julian wasn't your typical billionaire. He'd made his fortune behind the scenes, never chasing the spotlight, never wanting to be the face of anything. If you used a social media app, watched a streaming service, or bought anything online in the last 10 years, odds are his company, Nexus Innovations, was humming away in the background, keeping it all running. While other tech titans were buying super yachts and gracing magazine covers, Julian was at home in Austin, Texas, fiddling with old motorcycles and savoring the kind of quiet that only comes from living way out of the way. He wore jeans and soft t-shirts most days, but he could command a boardroom like nobody's business when it counted. And when it came to business, Julian liked fixing broken things, machines, systems, even companies. That's how he ended up owning a controlling stake in Vista Airlines, a once great carrier he'd been quietly buying up piece by piece. See, Julian never put his name out there. All the stock purchases were routed through shell companies and trusts, all orchestrated by his right-hand woman, Eleanor Vance, a razor-sharp, fiercely loyal CFO who played the public game while Julian stayed in the shadows. To everyone else, Vista was just another struggling airline, barely staying afloat with outdated planes and a customer service rating somewhere between a root canal and a traffic ticket. But Julian saw potential. With the right technology, the right leadership, maybe a little soul, he figured he could turn things around. So he started pulling the levers, installing allies on the board, and watching as the ancient machine began to shift. One of the new ideas from Julian's team was a back-to-the-floor program, a requirement that every exec spend time working among the crew and passengers. Get their hands dirty, see how things really run. Julian loved it. He believed you can't fix a system if you don't know how it feels on the ground. So he decided to go undercover as a regular customer. No first class, no private jet, just a middle seat in economy. Seat 24B, to be exact. He paid cash, used a burner email, wore a nondescript jacket, and tried to blend in as best he could. But here's the thing, and I think you know what I mean. Sometimes, it doesn't matter what you wear or how you act. Sometimes, all people see is what they want to see. The first leg from Austin to Denver was exactly what he expected. Cramped, stale, flight attendants going through the motions. But Julian wasn't there to complain. He was there to observe. The trouble really started during the layover in Denver, when his connection to San Francisco was delayed over and over again. Tensions were high at the gate, the staff overwhelmed, passengers left in the dark. When boarding finally began, Julian was one of the last to get on. The overhead bins were already packed, so he found an open spot a couple rows behind his seat and started to slide his bag in. That's when Bill, big guy, stained polo, attitude for days, decided to make his presence known. "That's my spot," he barked, not even looking up from his phone. Julian, polite as ever, explained that overhead bins are first come, first served. Bill didn't care. He said he was saving it for his buddy. Julian stood his ground. A small argument turned into a scene. Kevin, the flight attendant, rolled up, already sizing Julian up as the troublemaker. Instead of helping, he sided with Bill and told Julian he'd have to check his bag. End of discussion. Julian tried to reason, tried to keep it calm, but Kevin wasn't hearing it. When Julian pushed back, Captain Michael Callahan, the pilot, came striding out, dripping with authority. He looked at Julian and saw, well, let's just say he didn't see a valued customer. He saw someone who needed to be put in his place. "Son," he said, using that word like a weapon, "do as you're told or get off my aircraft." The whole cabin fell silent, every eye locked on Julian. You could feel the tension in the air, sharp as a knife. Julian made his choice. He handed over his bag and sat down, a knot tightening in his gut. The rest of the flight was icy. Kevin spilled soda on Julian's jacket and barely apologized, handing him a single flimsy napkin with a smirk. You know the look, the one that says, "You don't belong here." Julian didn't make a scene. He just noted everything, the wheels turning in his head. By the time they landed, he'd had enough. He pressed the call button and asked to speak with the captain after landing, wanting to file a formal complaint. That request sealed his fate. Instead of dealing with the complaint privately, Captain Callahan got on the intercom, his voice cold and booming, and announced that everyone had to stay seated because of a security threat. Code for "police are coming." Whispers and sideways glances rippled through the cabin. It was a public shaming, and everyone knew exactly who the threat was. When two San Francisco police officers boarded the plane, Julian didn't argue. He stood tall, head high, and let them escort him off. Bill, Kevin, Callahan, they all watched, sure they'd just made their point. But on the jet bridge, things flipped in an instant. Daniel Riley, the ground supervisor, came over to get the story. Julian calmly asked him to call the CEO, and then, cool as you like, dialed his own number to trigger an emergency protocol. Within minutes, an alert popped up on Riley's tablet, complete with Julian's photo and a message. Give this man every courtesy. Escalate all requests to the CEO's office. Callahan's face went ghostly white as it hit him. The passenger he'd tried to humiliate was, in fact, the airline's biggest shareholder, the man who could, with a word, end his career. David Corian, the CEO, called in a panic. Julian laid out exactly what happened. No drama, just the facts. He demanded that both Callahan and Kevin be terminated on the spot, their credentials revoked before he left the airport. The CEO agreed, desperate to contain the fallout. Julian then instructed Riley to retrieve his bag and escort him to the first-class lounge, making it clear he'd be meeting with his legal team, and that, until the company was reformed from top to bottom, he wouldn't be flying commercial again. It was absolute, devastating, and all of it happened in front of the crew who tried to treat him like a nobody. The story didn't stay quiet for long. A fellow passenger filmed the whole thing and leaked it to the press. At first, it looked like just another case of disruptive passenger removed from flight, until Nexus Innovations, at Julian's direction, released a statement revealing the truth. The passenger was the airline's largest shareholder, and this was a textbook example of systemic bias and failed leadership. The public exploded. Stock dropped, the media feasted, and the CEO was forced to make a groveling public apology, promising reforms across the board. But Julian didn't stop there. He purged the company of the old guard, brought in experts in ethics and diversity, invested in new tech and better planes, and retrained every staff member to focus on service, not intimidation. He even promoted Daniel Riley, the only one who tried to do the right thing under pressure, to lead a new national customer experience task force. In less than a year, Aero Vista was a different airline. Faster, fairer, more respected, and a living example of what happens when you try to put the wrong person in their place. Julian never took a victory lap. He just went back to his quiet life, letting his actions do the talking. But the story became legend, a warning and a lesson. Sometimes, karma wears a suit and flies coach. So, what do you think? Was this justice, karma, or just good business? Drop your thoughts below. If this story hit home, share it, hit that like button, and let's talk about what real accountability means, even at 30,000 feet.